Welcome to Windows on the World, and we've got another very fascinating show for you tonight. First of all, I'd like to tell you about our talks which are available featuring myself, Piers Corbyn and Sandy Adams, The Bigger Picture. We are at Bristol, the Arc Centre, on the 6th of October, and if you'd like to go, please go to windowsontheworld.net, click on the Eventbrite button, and you can read all about the talks on the site. The Bigger Picture is everything we talk about in the shows and more in a lot of depth, and the pantomime politics of left and right is what we're going to be addressing tonight, which ties in to the bigger picture. It ties into everything that we do talk about, and tonight we're going to talk about left, right and hate. The new politics of hate. Never has it been more obvious about the psychological political agenda that's going on than now. It's what you could call polarised in the extreme, but in actual fact it's all one agenda. So we're going to go into that. So in our last show we covered the extreme fake far left. Now, the alt-right is also a created phenomenon and pushed by its third-party Israeli agents such as Rebel Media and the Young Turks, and of course we've talked about their agents in this country, Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins, Pat Condell, David Vance. There's another one called Peter Sweden who doesn't live in Sweden, and all of these are staunch supporters of Israel, but they are what we call the fake alt-right because they have another agenda. Basically they are subversives, and if you look into what they do and our shows on them, you will find that there is a lot more going on behind the curtain, and that's what we like to look at. I'm just going to see if people are in chat. Yes, we've got a few. Of course, our usual staunch members of chat. Good evening, staunch members of chat. And we're going to talk about the other side of the coin from Soros. We talk about the Soros-funded groups and his open society quite a lot, and media action. And we talked about that last week, and how media action indirectly, this guy Dave Brock wanted to actually destabilise the American government. Well, this is subversion on a level that we haven't seen since the Cold War. But wait a minute. It's still all about the Russians, which is quite amusing because a lot of people are really falling for this stuff about Russia. And of course, the latest escapades and pantomimes going on there are continuing in the mainstream media, so I won't really go into that. Basically, we've got a creation of the intelligence services and fake news media, and it's all mentored and promoted to tie anything which opposes the global new totalitarianism to being an extremist. And we've had some comedic examples of this recently, and there's more to come. Of course, it's all about ad hominems and logical fallacies. I've just been looking up at all the different logical fallacies today, and it's quite interesting actually because the extremists who are controlling the narrative only actually use very, very limited tactics, usually around ad hominems, which is attacking the person and not the issue. And I've got a great example to start with of this kind of subversion, because last week I looked at a post on Facebook and I thought, ooh, this looks a bit dodgy. So I decided to put a comment on to see what happened. Now, I don't go on Facebook very much, and I'm sure that a lot of the stuff that I put on there can't be seen anyway. And somebody told me today that they were having their comments removed from my Facebook post. I don't know how true this is, but it's a trusted source, someone I think who listens to the show. So on Facebook, there's this page called the Stop Trump Coalition. Okay, it says this Wednesday in London, with fantastic international speakers and leading left voices from the UK, Europe faces a stark choice. plunging into a new dark ages. Oh, they love this one, don't they? The new dark ages, marked by the rising tide of fascism and nationalism, or advancing a new politics of radical and progressive change. This is what they want to do. They want to advance a new politics of radical and progressive change. Well, what would that change possibly be? It couldn't be global communism, could it? Run by a bunch of over-entitled and useless elites like we have in the EU at the moment. This is really funny as well, because you get these people supporting the EU and they're meant to be sort of left-leaning anarchists, and you think, well, how does that work? You know, how can you have this corrupt oligarchy that wants to nail down every single movement, action, and tax you to death? And then somehow it's all about being nice to each other and moving about freely, when it's absolutely the opposite. And this is the naivety that's going on, isn't it? But I'm going to carry on with this anyway. It says, to energise our attempts, we must reach out of our own countries and build pan-European alliances. Here we go. Join us in London to catalyse these efforts for a new and better Europe. A radical alliance for Europe will try to open up a debate by hosting political actors, you got that right, from across the continent, to show how we can combine defensive struggles with bold visions for social and political transformation. Oh yes, social justice, all this sort of stuff. Now, what happened was, there was no posts on it at all. Nobody had responded to this. So I put on my first post on it, I put, sounds like Soros. Dave Gill quickly responds and says, you sound like an anti-Semite. Strawman argument, logical fallacy, all the rest of it. But of course, this is what we've come to expect. So I carried on with it. I said, you have just supplied a brilliant and predictable quote. I will quote it on next week's show as an example of the worn-out psychological subversion of those with no argument. He responds, would that be a show about flying saucers and why climate change is fake news? Well, you got the second part of that right. I mean, a lot about climate change is fake news, but I don't think he's being ironic. So I responded and I said, why are subversives so predictable? Why can't they debate without resorting to the same old cliches? We debated Demos, which is this public policy think tank, at Goldsmiths, and despite their propaganda tricks, they lost the debate. Now, what I'd done is I'd looked up this guy, and he was at Goldsmiths, of course, Goldsmith College, that hotbed of radical subversion, not in a good way. So why don't you debate with us at Goldsmiths about your subversive tactics? We could stream it. So then he goes on to his next post, which is, I hear Elvis is still alive. So I said, I will quote this as an example of the collective hive mind on the run. I accept that you have no argument. And the funny thing was, he did accept it. That was it. He didn't have an argument. But that's just to point out how ludicrous things have become. Because if people can actually do that and in a way be serious without being ironic, then it shows you the depths to which we have actually fallen. Now, psychologists and social engineers have featured heavily on our previous shows, and do go back into the archive and look at all our shows on things like political correctness. Political correctness is now a form of psychology that is absolutely controlling the narrative. So let's have a look at where all this started. Let's do a little bit of a historical intro. Now, Wilhelm Wundt opened the Institute for Experimental Psychology at the University of Leipzig in Germany in 1879. This was the first laboratory dedicated to psychology, and its opening is usually thought of as the beginning of modern psychology. Indeed, Wundt is often regarded as the father of psychology. So he brought in this introspective psychology, which is where all of this neurosis came from. The psychological society, the neurosis of the Western mind. Psychology which helped create the psychological society, yes indeed, and of course the Hegelian dialectic. Now Wundt was very much influenced by Hegel. Now George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was born in August 27, 1770, died in November 14th, 1831. He was a German philosopher and an important figure of German idealism. He achieved wide recognition in his day, and while primarily influential within the continental tradition of philosophy, has become increasingly influential in the analytic tradition as well. Now, let's go on about dialectics, right? Because this is from the Encyclopedia of Mind Control by Jim Keith from 1997. It's actually a really interesting book, and it goes into the background of all these things we've talked about, like the Tavistock Institute, how it goes into public policy think tanks. And this is, I wouldn't say it's ahead of his time, but it's certainly quite a few years ago. But he was talking about dialectics, and he said that dialectics is a term used to describe a method of philosophical argument that involves some sort of contradictory process between opposing sides. In what is perhaps the most classic version of dialectics, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, for instance, presented his philosophical argument as a back and forth dialogue or debate, generally between the character of Socrates on one side and some other person or group of people to whom Socrates was talking, or his interlocutors, on the other. Now, in the course of the dialogue, Socrates' interlocutors propose definitions of philosophical concepts or express views that Socrates challenges or opposes. The back and forth debate between opposing sides produces a kind of linear progression or evolution in philosophical views or positions as the dialogues go along. Now, this is really interesting because what we get now is the opposite of that. We get the shutting down of it. So, in other words, we don't open debate. In mainstream media these days, it shuts it down with the techniques that we've so far been talking about. Now, this is interesting because in 1847, the London Communist League, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, used Hegel's theory of the dialectic to back up their economic theory of communism. Now, you'll like this, Eric von Essex, because it's right up your street. Now, in the 21st century, Hegelian Marxist thinking affects our entire social and political structure. The Hegelian dialectic is the framework for guiding our thoughts and actions into conflicts that lead us to a predetermined solution. Now, we talk about this all the time, predetermined solutions. Everything is a predetermined solution. And what I'm getting back from people out there is that all remedy is being taken away, to the point where political parties are all merely one part of the same machine, which is the Soviet model. It's called the system of parties. So we have the system of parties, we have the alt-right and the fake far left. The alt-right, of course, was created so that MI5 and, of course, all of the intelligence services and the media can label anyone outside the narrow corridor of accepted public opinion as an extremist and far right. Even denying anthropological global warming now makes you far right. This is how far civilization has fallen. But this is very important because if we do not understand how the Hegelian dialectic shapes our perceptions of the world, then we do not know how we are helping to implement the vision. When we remain locked into dialectical thinking, we cannot see outside the box. And that's all of this is about, seeing outside the box. And this is what we're constantly doing, because anyone who listens to the show is outside the box. Now, you have these insane arguments with these people, and they have no point. They cannot make a point, and they cannot argue. And this is the scary thing. And we're going to go into some examples of that tonight, but also some great own goals, which in actual fact prove that the public are fighting back against this, and they're not actually that stupid. They're not going to put up with it to much more of an extent than they are doing now, I don't think, because it's got to the point where there has to be a little backlash. And of course, that's what we're here for. Have some fun doing it as well. But Hegel's dialectic is the tool which manipulates us into a frenzied circular pattern of thought and action. Every time we fight or defend against an ideology, we are playing a necessary role in Marx and Engels' grand design to advance humanity into a dictatorship of the proletariat. The synthetic Hegelian solution to all these conflicts can't be introduced unless we all take a side that will advance the agenda. Again, fake left, fake right. Hate speak. The Marxist global agenda is moving along at a breakneck speed. Now, this was in 1997, but as we know, it's been going on a lot before that. The only way to completely stop the privacy invasions, expanding domestic police powers, land grabs, that's a big one, isn't it now, insane wars against inanimate objects and transient verbs, covert actions and outright assaults on individual liberty, is to step outside the dialectic. And that's what this show's about. This releases us from the limitations of controlled and guided thought. In other words, be unpredictable. This is what this kind of system cannot factor in. When we understand what motivated Hegel, we can see his influence on all of our destinies. Hegelian conflicts steer every political arena on the planet, from the United Nations to the major American political parties, all the way down to local school boards and community councils. Isn't that just the truth? We are seeing this at a local level. That's what our talk, The Bigger Picture, is all about. And the Agenda 2030 policies, which came out of Agenda 21, which is the United Nations Global Action Plan, being implemented at a local level. Everything you're seeing is part of this plan, everything locally. And no, your local council will not represent you. There is a very, very thin veneer of what appears like public consultation and public agreement or consensus, and consensus isn't agreement. Consensus just means that it looks as though everyone agrees. So, dialogues and error. How did I predict that? The next line is, dialogues and consensus building are primary tools of the dialectic, and terror and intimidation are also acceptable formats for attaining the goal. Now, this was written in 1997. Of course, Antifa weren't really around there in their current form at that time, but look how right this is. This is absolutely spot on with what's going on. The ultimate third way agenda is world government. Once we get what's really going on, we can cut the strings and move our lives in original directions outside the confines of the dialectical madness. Now, focusing on Hegel and Engel's ultimate agenda and avoiding getting caught up in their impenetrable theories of social evolution, we just don't want to do that, gives us the opportunity to think and act our way towards freedom, justice and genuine liberty for all. Now, this is spot on with what this guy is saying, and it actually reiterates what we say in our shows. Therefore, globalists must control the narrative at all costs. The public has to be divided as much as possible in order to keep them distracted from the guiding hand of the cabal itself. Isn't that the truth? And any group that opposes them directly has to be co-opted or destroyed. We talk about this every week, how organisations are taken over, how we should basically live outside this narrative and not be affiliated with any group, because all groups are controlled. Then they become the controlled opposition. And you can go back really into our archives and find that this is the sort of stuff we've been talking about for years. Now, the more people focus on globalists and their organisations as the core source of social instability, the more uncomfortable they become. Now, that has happened to an extent with the Soros-backed groups, but we're talking about what is a shadow government here. And of course, now we've got the fake-funded alt-right and far-right, which they're promoting as the basic divide and rule strategy. When the ideology of globalism is discussed in liberty movement circles, there are often misunderstandings as to the source of the threat and what it truly represents. Now, that's a really good point, isn't it? Because most people don't agree on this at all, of what globalism actually is. That's why we try and simplify it down to something that people can relate to. Now, yes, very interesting point. This may in some cases be by design. Yep, absolutely it is. It is by design. It's by divide and rule, by design. In the latest era of supposed populism, led by figures like Donald Trump, an entirely new and very green generation of liberty activists find themselves hyper-focused on the political left in general, right? But they seem to be obsessed with attacking the symptoms of globalism rather than the source. I attribute this to a clever propaganda campaign by globalist institutions. Now, this is from an article that I've put into the chat box, and it's very interesting. I think everyone's chatting away in there, but I put it in earlier on, and there's been loads of comments since then. It's from altmarket.com. It's called Understanding the Tactics of Subversive Globalism, which is right up the streets there of everything we talk about. Andy James, welcome Andy. Thanks for signing into chat. Hello to Uniquely, Monthly Blimpton, of course, and Eric Von Essex, and all the rest of the people listening out there, because we have a very select few people who go into chat, but of course there's lots of people out there listening. So if you want to join in, just sign into chat. It's on the windowsontheworld.net/live shows page. Go to the home page and then go to live shows, and you can sign into chat there. So Eric Von Essex, as a little side issue here, says, I feel so safe when walking down my high street with security cameras looking at me at every angle. I think they are even in the cars when I take a pee. Well, in California, they recently had to have these cameras taken out of the toilets because they could actually see into them. It was at one of these council buildings in California. If you look at Grindall 61 on YouTube, you can go them in filming the filming of the cameras and then saying, well, you can see into the ladies' toilets here, look at that. And then eventually they took them out. But you are absolutely right. But Eric Von Essex, aren't you some kind of conspiracy theorist? I mean, of course they're there for your own security. CCTV is always there for your own security, apart from on 7/7, of course. But that was slightly different. Oh, and apart from, of course, if any crime takes place and you need the footage from the police. Now, what's also interesting is the point here is that a lot of these private companies that are in partnership with the police, I mean, I don't think most of these cameras are actually on most of the time. You know, it is there just to do the old 1984 bit, you know. But when you get somebody psychotic with a knife, are they going to be worried that there's a CCTV camera there? They've probably forgotten all about that, I would think. Let's carry on. For example, when globalism is brought up in terms of its conspiratorial influences, the name of George Soros is usually mentioned. Oh yes, we have mentioned him quite a lot. We do fall into that trap. Soros is an obvious bogeyman for liberty activists because his money can be found flowing to numerous cultural Marxist social justice organisations, and his influence is easily grasped and digested in that way. Conservatives like placing emphasis on Soros because he appears decidedly leftist, and thus globalism becomes synonymous with leftist movements. But what about all the globalists within the political right? Again, the alt-right, the people who do not criticise that third party who's funding them. You know, that third party, the one we're not allowed to talk about now, if we're in the Labour Party. Globalism has its gatekeepers in both political camps. Both political camps, yes. Now that's very important. People that manipulate or outright control political leaders and political messages on the right, just as they do on the left. Now, while someone like George Soros acts as a gatekeeper for the left, we also have people like Henry Kissinger, a globalist gatekeeper for the right. Well, I think he plays both sides, really. Kissinger's close relationship with the Trump administration for his long-time friendship with Russia's Vladimir Putin are brought up far less in the liberty movement these days. That's an interesting point. Why? Because this does not fit with the false narrative that the globalists are targeting Trump or Putin. When you examine these leaders and their ties to a vast array of globalist proponents, this claim becomes absurd. Very good point there. Now, this is really interesting. This was this guy, Mark Collett, and he did a nice little analysis of the right-wing side of the media. In other words, the way they try and appeal to people on the right, on the supposed right. Now, anyone who listens to this show knows that we don't do right or left, but I get accused of being right-wing because I criticise these lunatics who can't express a thought or have a political point. And if you attack people on that basis and say you haven't got a point, all of a sudden you're far right. It's a bit like, well, climate's changing all the time. I don't believe in anthropological global warming. Oh, you must be a far-right extremist then. Exactly. So he's put this together quite nicely, actually. It ties into what we talk about. And it's the right-wing side of the media. Now, firstly, what happens is if you want to introduce something, it's a little bit like the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution. In other words, you create the problem, you get this huge public reaction, and the solution is what you planned in the first place. So basically, it's you could say it's about the terrorism threat, and then of course the solution. The outrage is, how can we let this happen? Let's have much more surveillance. Let's get rid of all our rights because of the bogeyman. That's problem, reaction, solution. But he said first, this outrage, they create an outrage and a sense of anger about some damaging social trend. And we see this all the time. And it creates empathy with the listener. But there's no solution at this stage. There's just outrage. How can this happen? Point two is oversaturation, and we see this all the time in the media. Repeated shock stories that normalise the problem. Then the problem becomes normalised because people get fed up of hearing about it. Now then, they create sympathy for the issue. So the stories of discrimination against what are now victims. So basically, you turn these people into victims. So you turn the subversives into the victim. You get empathy for the victim, and then they can become the spokespeople. Well, it's a bit like someone like Peter Tatchell. He's used exactly for that. He's a subversive, and all of a sudden he's a virtue signalling great person. Well, he's been rather deflated because of his comments on paedophilia, quite rightly so. But there are people who even till a few years ago were having him on their shows, and he's pretty disgusting character in my opinion. Now, stage 4, the process to acceptance and even support from something that people oppose. Again, this is all what we've been talking about here, the Hegelian dialectic. So basically, these are absolutely simplistic ways that public narratives are actually controlled. Now, this is an interesting point. We're going to get into some other stuff about what's happening, give some examples of it. But I just want to go on a bit more about Hegel. Now, Hegel's stated belief was that man is subordinate to the state and only finds fulfillment in obedience to the dictates of the state, which is where all of this stuff comes from. So, in other words, I would describe myself as an anarchist not because I go around with a big A on my jumper and a mask on my face and throw a few crowd barriers about at protests. No, that's the police, right? They're posing as anarchists. Now, the thing about the anarchist just means self-government and being able to have a small government that works for you. Just have a small government. And it's the opposite of what leftists want. So leftists are actually collectivists. They have a hive mind. And when you look at the comments that they make, when they attack you, which they do, it's like a pack of hyenas, even on that Facebook. If you put something in the wrong group, they all attack you like a pack of hyenas. But they don't have an argument. They always use the ad hominems and logical fallacies. So Hegel stated, the state is the absolute reality, and the individual in himself has objective existence, truth and morality only in his capacity as a member of the state, collectivism. This philosophy can be and has been used for the justification of any number of atrocities committed upon the human race, and provides an unexamined substratum to the philosophies of many politicians today. It actually does. Of course, we can look at things like the Fabian Society, etc. And of course, the Tavistock Institute. All of this stuff comes through psychology, it comes through society, filtered into psychology, into NGOs and these groups, such as Demos, the think tank. We talk about them quite a lot, and they're really, really key to it in a lot of respects. But this philosophy can be and has been used for the justification of any number of atrocities. Absolutely correct. If only the omelette or the state, he says, is important, what does it matter if we lose a few million eggs in the process of cooking up the dish? There you go. That's what communism is about. Hegel was the originator of the theory of the dialectic, the idea that conflict determines history. According to Hegel, a force or a thesis dictates its own opposing force, the antithesis. These forces in conflict result in the creation of a third force, a synthesis. This is where it all comes together. This is what we've been talking about so far. Out of this synthesis, the process begins again. Marx later revised the theory of the dialectic, insisting that only material events were relevant and that the dialectic was inherent in matter, thus divorcing the idea from metaphysics, at least for his own satisfaction. A lot of this stuff is about the denying of anything supernatural or the soul, whatever you think of that, or anything natural, as in, more importantly to what we are at the moment, natural law. So, in other words, this is against the natural order of the universe. That's not just my opinion, because if you look at what natural law is, it's the antithesis of this. From the theory of the dialectic comes the realization that the creation of conflicts can create determined outcomes or synthesis. And this was written in 1997. This is again from Mind Control, the encyclopedia of. Those who promote the New World Order again and again are seen to be using the theory of the Hegelian dialectic to bring it about. They are manipulating events, creating conflicts, creating wars, and destroying the lives of untold millions. There you go. Naturally, the Hegelian system goes completely against the grain of most people, particularly in the West, who view the individual as the true sovereign. Now, this is why, obviously, the political narrative has had to be controlled, and people have had to be mind controlled into this agenda, which Soros is spending billions on. Thus, the real enemies are not America versus the Soviets or the political left versus the right, but those who would manipulate the yin and yang of history. Exactly, the puppet masters in the background. Now, getting back to Wilhelm Wundt. Wundt's rejection of the intangibles of life, such as soul, mind, and free will, have influenced psychiatry and psychology up to the present day. And now you know why shrinks look so weird and often have nervous tics, he carries on. They have been taught that they do not have a soul. Now, this is absolutely fascinating, and it's the area that I really like to go into. So, with that as our background, let's now carry on with some examples from this week's news. Labour monitor Facebook pages which mention them or Corbyn. Right, now this is verbatim. This is what's been put out to people who are members of the Labour Party who are running Facebook pages. Encouraging group members to use the report to admin feature and take these reports seriously. Encourage group members to use the report to admin feature and take these reports seriously. So there you go. They're starting controversy straight away. Frequently review the reported content using Facebook's moderation sidebar. Here we go, even more subversive and sinister. Screenshot and then delete the posts with anti-Semitic or otherwise discriminatory content and block the user responsible. Now, as if the Labour Party haven't excluded enough of their members already, enough of their members who are actually real supporters of what this party is meant to be about. You know, look at Wadsworth, Jackie Walker. There's been loads of them, and I won't even go into that now. Email complaints@labour.org.uk. So there you go. If anybody has seen anything that might be a little bit anti-Semitic, a little bit subversive, go and tell teacher. With screenshots and links to anti-Semitic or prejudicial comments or posts, if you believe, here it is all about belief, if you believe the individual who has posted them may be a Labour member. So this can be investigated by the party. So now we've got the absolute Stasi coming in here and have taken over momentum, which was the idea in the first place. Look at our short report, Momentum and Labour Zionism, to see exactly what John Landsman is, what he is about, and how he is manipulating the Labour Party. And this was a year ago, and he's actually managed to do it because he wanted to get into the debate how we were allowed to talk about Israel. So we now have to be allowed to talk about Israel. Eric von Essex, Gab is a new alternative to Facebook. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. What's Eric? I'll keep up with a couple of his posts actually. Most psychiatrists need a psychiatrist. Now that's actually very true, because if you read The Psychological Society by Martin L. Gross, and I would actually recommend that to anybody. It was written in the late 70s, and it takes apart what psychologists are. And basically, when they were looking for patients to be tested for psychological experiments, they needed people who didn't need a psychologist. They only wanted people who were absolutely well balanced, well ordered, and would just go along with whatever was needed. I mean, it's absolutely incredible when you read into this stuff. Let's call it what it is, subversion. So look at it. This thing carries on anyway. Change settings if necessary to allow administrators to approve or deny requests to join the group so that you have greater control of who is in the group. Now, this is Facebook. This is social media. So, in other words, this is absolute totalitarian, non-free speech, Orwellian stuff going on here. Comment or post in the group regularly, reminding people that posts or comments which include anti-Semitic or otherwise hateful or prejudicial content will be removed. Now, this is all defined about the way someone feels about something. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And the users will be blocked and encourage members to report any posts they see which are offensive or inappropriate. Again, what we're getting in here is hive mind group speak. You know, in other words, oh, if you've offended one of us, you've offended us all. You know, this is absolutely what we have been predicting and talking about. And they're just saying it openly as though it's all right. The party will soon be launching a political education programme. The party. Now, what's the difference between this and communist countries? The party will be soon launching a political education programme. Is this North Korea? Is this Soviet-era Russia? No! It's Facebook 2018, the Labour Party. This will include videos and other online resources. So they're going to be training you how not to be a free thinker. We would greatly appreciate if you could share such content once published in Facebook groups and other forums, blah-de-blah-blah. Please reply confirming receipt of this letter and confirming that the request the party has made will be adhered to. So this is like what the police would do. You know, you've got to confirm receipt of it. Basically it's been served. It's a legal document. We're serving it, you know. Now, this is incredible, but let's get on to some good news. South Yorkshire Police full on retarded. Is that hate speak? No, it's a fact. Look at their video on YouTube and it's called Hate Hurts. This is the full title. Hate Hurts, report it and put a stop to it. Right? And the good news is it's had 1 like, which is South Yorkshire Police, obviously, and 73 dislikes. And it's only got about 1,000 and odd views. Do have a look at it. I've put it in the chat box, but you couldn't make this stuff up. But this is absolutely incredible. What an own goal they have just scored. And South Yorkshire Police, the amount of corruption that they've been involved in, we don't have to go into that, but just look it up. They carry on. In addition to reporting hate crime, please report non-crime. Wait a minute. In addition to reporting hate crime, okay, well that's all subjective anyway, right? Please report non-crime hate incidents. So I'm going to go to the police and there's been a non-crime committed. Why am I going to the police? Because it's a non-crime hate incident and someone's feelings have been hurt. This is like grievous bodily harm of the airwaves. You know, this has been transmitted. This is actually, I mean, when I think about this, it's so ridiculous when my friend got stitched up and got charged with grievous bodily harm when she didn't do anything and became the most wanted woman in Kent, resulting in Crime Stoppers being taken down. And then they're talking about this sort of stuff. And the amount of people that are in prison because of the police, etc., and the CPS not doing their jobs, and also, in a way, perverting the course of public justice, and also stitching people up, creating crime by crime farming. And now they're putting this out. So yeah, this can include things like offensive or insulting comments. Offensive or insulting comments. Well, in actual fact, those 70 odd people, or there's more than that, have actually commented. they could be reported for offensive or insulting comments to South Yorkshire Police. But they've actually done it on South Yorkshire Police YouTube channel, which is even more hilarious. So South Yorkshire Police are going to be really busy looking into all this hate speak, which has been directed back at them when they're trying to get people to report hate speak to them. So it's in a way, it's a form of crime farming, isn't it? They're creating their own narrative here. It says hate will not be tolerated in South Yorkshire. Report it and put a stop to it. Ironically, this has generated this huge response, and just go and look at it online. It's so funny. The public are giving them a massive amount of well-deserved abuse for doing this. Now, South Yorkshire Police defended its tweet, saying non-criminal incidents can feel like an offence to the victim. This is beyond Brave New World now, isn't it? But who writes this crap? Who are they paying to write this crap? Because I've had things like this coming back from public authorities, councils and the police. And the thing is about these people is they will lie, generally, my opinion and what's happened to me, my experience, they will lie to your face and on paper. And now they're saying that non-criminal incidents can feel like an offence. And this is what happens, isn't it? When you phone them up, they say, don't be aggressive, when you're actually stating a fact. I'm going to terminate this conversation. So in other words, nothing is going to be allowed to be said. But it was relentlessly mocked, it carries on here. This is actually from Yahoo News, right? It was relentlessly mocked with more than 5,000 responses to the Sunday Night Post. Many people likened the force to George Orwell's Thought Police from his novel 1984. Well, it's catching on, you see. People are realising. Paul Winters said, non-crime hate incidents is a bit wordy. Might I suggest you condense it? I think thought crime has a nice ring, don't you think? Shame on you. Soon your citizens will no longer even greet one another in public for fear of reprisal. This is a bridge towards totalitarianism. Well, of course it is. That's the whole point. Posting a picture of a front cover of Orwell's classic, Joe Neal said, I'd suggest a copy of this for all officers. And watch Minority Report. You could probably just lock a good 25% of the public away now and call it crime prevention. Well, don't encourage them. They probably will. Now, here's a couple of tweets that were put up which were quite amusing. Not to forget its anti-white racist overtones and its poorly expressed implied threats of police harassment of those who speak freely. So South Yorkshire Police response was, police can only prosecute when the law is broken, but we want to know about non-crime hate incidents. Go to our website. Please get in touch. Yours sincerely. Yes, that's South Yorkshire Police there. Quite incredible, isn't it? Now, here's an interesting one. Very interesting. It ties into what that person was saying on there. White people, now the biggest ethnic group arrested for terror offences in the UK. Well, the MI5 narrative's working, isn't it? Well, there's a growing threat of the extreme far right. Oh, no, there isn't. Oh, yes, there is. The pantomime continues, of course. Of course, and this is what's happening, because now all of these useful idiots and the absolute morons who are enforcing this are saying, you don't believe in climate change, you're extreme far right, you're a racist. I mean, the thing is that it's post-truth world now has gone post-truth world. White people, now the biggest ethnic group arrested for terror offences in the UK. A member of the banned neo-Nazi group National Action, which looked as though to me it had been infiltrated. Look at a show we did called National Action Comedy Nazis. Now, some people who didn't know about that group said, no, the group is real, and I never disputed that the group was real. But I said it's being infiltrated and it's being used for this agenda. And of course it was. It was used to bring in this agenda. So they banned it. Problem, reaction, solution. They bring in the problem, national action, publicise it, give it huge publicity. What should we do? Then they bring in the solution. And the solution is all white people are racists. So white people arrested for suspected terrorist offences in the UK now outstrips those of Asian ethnicity for the first time in over a decade, according to a new figures published by the Home Office. Well, this is all to do with the constructed narrative, because after 7/7, of course, and 9/11, but ours was 7/7, the London Underground and bus bombings. Now after that, the whole thing changed, and of course we had all these Muslims being raided if they had some hydrogen peroxide on them, and now it's changed back to whites. So anybody who can't see that this is a constructed narrative and a fake cartoon pantomime must be off their heads, and a lot of people are, because I still get this. I mean, I get now accused of being a Russian sympathiser. Can you imagine? Just because I put up a post about the Skripal story, and somebody had posted something about it, and I said, well, you do realise that one of their relatives phoned them, and they said they'd just been to a pub and got food poisoning, and they go, have you got any sources for your wannabe journalism? And I said, yes, Sky News. I mean, if you just put it in, it comes up straight away. Skripal's cousin, or Skripal's relative, stated that the Skripals had food poisoning. So you put Skripal's food poisoning relative and it comes up straight away. What is the matter with these people? I just don't get it, you know. They won't even look. That's the really weird thing. I mean, everyone's got the internet at their fingertips, and to not even bother looking before you make what she did was score a massive own goal. So her trusted sources are Sky News, and I'm a wannabe conspiracy theorist type. Well, wait a minute, I was quoting your sources, your mainstream media sources, the ones that you watch every day, you know. But statistics released by the Home Office show that white suspects accounted for 38% of terrorist-related arrests. Those of an Asian appearance accounted for 37% of offences, followed by black suspects way down on 9%. The report states this was the first time since the year ending June 2005 that the proportion of white people arrested has exceeded the proportion of Asian people arrested, the report said. National Action leader jailed for 8 years over banned neo-Nazi group membership. This is the headline. It was the second highest number of arrests of white people in a year since the data collection began in 2001. Now, all of this has been completely manufactured by MI5 and those clowns in the civil service who are doing this, and the stupid police who go along with it, and it's now part of their remit, isn't it? Absolutely pathetic. So there you go, the pantomime of the fake far left and the fake far right. So, yeah, it also says here, the number of far-right extremists currently imprisoned in UK jails has risen sharply over the past year from 10 to 28. Well, it's not really a lot, is it? But, I mean, what did they get imprisoned for? That is the point. I mean, if you're going around inciting hatred, then okay, fine. But we know how ridiculous it's gone just by listening to what we've been doing on tonight's show. It's, as it says here, conversely, the number of Islamic extremists in prison has dipped for the first time. Yes. So MI5's PR campaign and pantomime, Hegelian dialectic, is paying off. The Home Office said the number of Islamist extremist prisoners saw a slight decrease for the first time to 178 in custody. Well, over the past year, they've imprisoned 10 to 28 people. So they can't even make up their mind probably whether they're far right or what they're going to call them, but there's 10 to 28 of them. So how can there be 10 to 28? They've either been convicted of it or not, you know. So again, another load of rubbish. The proportion of prisoners holding far-right ideologies has increased steadily. Well, that's because they're looking for it. So they're going for someone who's probably got a Union Jack in their back garden or a George's Cross tattoo and calling them far right, you know. I mean, it's absolutely pathetic. But this is the profiling that's going on now. Yes, so over the past 3 years, number up from 10 to 28, same result again. As it says, in 2016, the far-right group National Action was prescribed as a terrorist organisation in the UK, the first of its kind. A wave of police raids on neo-Nazis quickly followed this landmark moment. Of course it did. Of course it did. And look at what they found in Thomas Mayer's house. You know, it was like a to-do shopping list of what the goons, the stupid civil servants in MI5 and the intelligence services think that unwhite extremists should have, from their slideshow that they've been shown. The same with the police. In June, Jack Renshaw, who was accused of being a member of National Action, admitted to plotting to murder British Labour MP Rosie Cooper with a machete for white jihad, making threats to kill a police officer. Now, that's absolutely outrageous, But what are they really talking about here? What are they talking about? Because it doesn't look to me as though that's the norm. In fact, I think that's something that could well have been concocted. You have to look into it. Let's move on. Now, EU censorship. The European Union chief executive has proposed a new law which would require Google, Facebook, Twitter and other online platforms to remove extremist content within 1 hour or face a fine. Oh yes, 1 hour is the decisive time window. The greatest damage takes place, said alcoholic Jean-Claude Juncker in his annual State of the Union address to the European Parliament. Those who fail to remove extremist content within the 1 hour limit could face a fine of up to 4% of their annual global turnover, which could equal $4 billion for Google alone. Well, I don't think they'll be charged with it. The 1 hour timeline is a significant step up from the 3 months internet companies were given in March to show they were acting faster to take down radical posts. Now, EU regulators say too little is being done without legislation forcing them to take action. So, the turkeys voting for Christmas who love the EU, who want their lives micromanaged by these absolutely decadent communist subversives, are going to get what they deserve. And the way that these collectivists act is retarded, and I hope that hurts their feelings, because it's actually true. And this is the thing, they pull up things that are actually true. And I even got pulled up for using the word libtard. And this idiot said, I've been a journalist for 30 years and I'd never describe anyone as that. Well, there's two types of journalism, isn't there? There's where you put the news out at 8:30 a.m. Mark Windows left his home, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. When he returned, blah-de-blah-de-blah. There have been several robberies in the area, blah, 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 blah. You can either do the full-on news, or you can do a delayed drop, where you basically give a bit of exposition first. There's two ways to write news. So when you're writing news, you wouldn't be calling people libtards. You'd be describing something that happens. But most of the things that they cite as their sources are opinion pieces from rags like The Guardian. So they then say, oh, we don't use slang. They use it all the time. They call people names all the time. That's all they do. And then they have the cheek to come out and say, oh, you used the word libtard. I said, well, that's describing people who supported the Democrat criminal Hillary Clinton at the time, Now, did you know that Syrian state YouTube channels have been shut down just as the Syrian army's ground offensive has officially begun? This includes the following now terminated Syrian state and pro-government channels: and Syrian Presidency, Syria MOD, Ministry of Defence, Sana and Sana TV. I have to look that up because I watched that Sana TV to see what's going on. This follows YouTube reportedly closing Syria's Autos News last week. Now, this is exactly what happened to Press TV when Netanyahu was chest beaten a few years ago, wasn't it? All of a sudden they're saying that they can't broadcast because they broadcast from Tehran. Well, they've got London studios as well, but Ofcom, it basically doesn't need an excuse, does it? It needs a reason, but not an excuse. If that makes any sense. They don't need a real excuse, they just need a reason. Right, Eric Von Essex says, I wouldn't even wipe my bum with The Guardian. Well, no, it's very unhealthy to do things like that anyway, isn't it? Because, it's newsprint. What about all that newsprint? I mean, even by reading it, you're getting polluted, aren't you? If anyone didn't know yet that we live in a one-agenda dictatorship, then looking at our back catalogue of shows might help. That was a note I made earlier on, so do look at our back catalogue of shows. Now, the whole premise of our talks, this is really important, the bigger picture, emphasises what we're talking about tonight. So do book us and try and come along to Bristol on the 6th of October at the Arc Centre from 12 a.m. We'll be there all day, and it's going to be great. And part of this is the exchange of information, and that's what I think is the most important thing. The calling for another referendum on Brexit, promoted and paid for by obvious subversives, might also give some inkling as to what's going on. This is absolutely incredible, and this is what we've been talking about in this show, because basically we're being led into no choice whatsoever, and that's getting more and more obvious. The consensus doesn't really even work anymore. The joining together of issues is of primary importance. The most obvious is with the aligning climate change and the need for global population reduction and control through taxation and control of population. And that's what these, well, let's call them what they are. Extreme leftists, call them whatever you want, it doesn't matter. Let's call them libtards, it really doesn't matter. These are just words to describe people who can't think. Like, I can think, I'm a journalist. You get these absolutely insane responses from these people, and it's all about ad hominems. They always, none of them will look at the information that we put out. None of them. I don't think they can even understand what we put out. People who attack in that way. It's incredible, really. But basically, you've got all these people who want to stop Brexit, and they just want more taxation and more control and more laws. Well, that's what they want, that's what collectivists want, I suppose. And there you go, we're pigeonholing them. Why not? Yeah. Now, this is interesting, and something of a more positive note to actually finish on. Katie Hopkins has applied for involuntary solvency agreement after losing a libel case. This is from the Evening Standard. It was for a case brought against her by author Jack Monroe. Official government documents reveal that Miss Hopkins applied for an IVA in May this year in order to avoid bankruptcy. In 2017, she was forced to pay £24,000 libel damages and legal costs to Jack Monroe after she implied that the author had vandalised a war memorial in a tweet during 2015. So she clearly hasn't been trained in the art of journalism, because you'd never do that unless you actually had proof and it was from a provable source. The legal costs are said to be £107,000 according to the BBC. So Katie's going to have to go on to Zio Rebel Media and do lots more shows with Tommy Robinson and all the rest of the fake extremist subversive far left friends of Israel. Or maybe they'll pay for her. Let's see what happens with that one. It'll be quite interesting. But that's some good news to finish the show off with anyway. She said, for the want of an apology, this Jack Monroe says. He says he's been paid in full, so he's got his 107 grand. For the want of an apology, a house, a job, a column, a radio show, and now financial solvency were lost. It's all very sad, actually. So he's got her money, and he feels sorry for her. Good call. Miss Hopkins currently works for far-right Canadian outlet Rebel Media. What an absolute joke. Them and the Young Turks and all the rest of the crap they put out. Absolutely ridiculous. Yes, give them a bit of what they want to hear. Ezra Levant, Rebel Media, after her radio show on LBC was taken off the air after she called for a final solution following the Manchester terror attack. Well, that was stupid anyway. Final solution doesn't mean that she's talking about the final solution. She said a final solution. So the final solution, the whole thing's absurd. Well, let them play around in it. Let them swim in their own sea of subversion. That's about it for this week, I think. But that's just something to finish off with, really. And next week we are going to do that historical show. That Shekel Media, very good, and on 687, very, very good, like that, yes. We can't say that though, of course. Well, we can, because it's they're funded by interests which are not the interests of whom they purport to be. So which is subversion, really. And it's about, paid lobbyists. Should lobbyists be allowed to control the narrative? No, they shouldn't. But that's it from this week. Next week we are going to do that historical show. We've been putting it all together, and it's about the ancient history of the world and Britain in particular. Very interesting stuff, and it will take us into a direction we have touched on but never really gone into in this respect before. So thanks a lot for listening, everybody. That's it for this week, and next week we're going to go into depth with some ancient world history. Thanks a lot, everybody, and good night.